The president was railing against the press yesterday again and again, calling the press the enemy of the people. He did make one exception at that joint news conference with the president of Finland, where he said, hey, there was actually a good New York Times story put out for me today. Let's get into that. The chairman of the House Intel Committee reportedly learned about the Ukraine whistleblower's complaint against President Trump days before it was officially filed, according to the New York Times, citing a spokesman for Democrat Adam Schiff, along with current and former U.S. officials. The CIA officer, the whistleblower, approached a House Intel Committee aide with his concerns about the president only after first having a colleague relay them to the CIA's top lawyer. The Times says the officer approached the aide after becoming concerned about how their initial attempt for revealing the allegations through the CIA was unfolding, adding that in both cases the original accusation was vague. The paper goes on to write that the House staff member, following the committee's procedures, suggested the officer find a lawyer to advise and meet with an inspector general with whom he could file an official whistleblower complaint. The aide shared some of what the officer conveyed to Chairman Schiff, but not the whistleblower's identity. In a statement to NBC News, a spokesman for Schiff said, in part, the whistleblower contacted the committee for guidance on how to report possible wrongdoing within the jurisdiction of the intelligence community. This is a regular occurrence given the committee's unique oversight role and responsibilities. At no point did the committee review or receive the complaint in advance. Top members of the Senate Intel Committee, including Republican Chairman Richard Burr, suggested the House committee followed protocol, saying it was standard procedure to refer whistleblowers to the relevant inspectors general. Here's President Trump's reaction yesterday to that New York Times report.
Your response to the fact that that happened and that Schiff may have learned some of what the whistleblower knew prior to the complaint?
Well, I think it's a scandal that he knew before. I go a step further. I think he probably helped write it. Okay, that's what the word is. And I think it's, I give a lot of respect for the New York Times for putting it out. Just happened as I'm walking up here, they handed it to me. And I said to Mike, I said, whoa, that's something, that's big stuff. That's a big story. He knew long before, and he helped write it too. It's a scam, it's a scam. Just to finish on this, I appreciate it, I love that second question, by the way. Should have asked it first. but let me just tell you, the whole thing is a scam. The Mueller deal was a scam. The Russian collusion was a scam. You can ask Putin. Nobody's been rougher on Russia than Donald Trump. Okay?
We should point out the reporter asking the question to the president misrepresented the Times reporting, putting forth the idea that Chairman Schiff knew about the substance of the complaint in advance, which allowed the president to suggest the congressman had a hand in writing it. The reporting and Schiff's statement say that is not the case. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent covering national security and intelligence, Ken Delaney. And Ken, you've been on this story all night. Walk us through what exactly happened and if Adam Schiff did anything wrong, because the president clearly there, and we saw all day yesterday after this story broke, his supporters claiming they have a smoking gun here, that somehow Adam Schiff helped the whistleblower craft his complaint to get at the president.
Well, Willie, the most important thing for our viewers to understand about this is what happened here is exactly how the system is supposed to work and how it routinely works with the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. My sources tell me that 2 to 3 times a month, a member of the intelligence community, intelligence officer, will come to the committees, particularly in this case, the House Intelligence Committee, with a complaint of some sort that they want to bring to Congress's attention. And the staff will always give them the same answer. Don't tell us anything classified. We're on an unsecure phone, most likely. Get a lawyer, go to the inspector general, because that's what the law calls for. File your complaint, and then it will get to us eventually if it's an urgent concern. And most of those complaints never end up getting to them because they're often not very serious. This one was quite serious, but there's no evidence that Schiff's office or Schiff's aides helped this whistleblower write this complaint, and we don't even really know exactly what Schiff knew about it. I mean, he knew it was serious, that's clear, but it's also important for people to understand that this wasn't the first time that this whistleblower had conveyed his complaint. He first, through a colleague, brought his complaint to the CIA Inspector General, and I've got that confirmed through my own sources, and he became convinced, this is according to the New York Times, that the complaint complaint was not being handled properly because he learned that the CIA Inspector General had alerted the White House counsel's office, the very subject of the complaint, about the contents of it, and had brought in officials at the Justice Department, and the whistleblower was worried that it was going to be essentially covered up. So he goes to the House committee. The House committee says, file a complaint with the Inspector General. He does that. The next thing Schiff learns about it is that the complaint is being withheld. Yeah. The Congress gets notified by the Inspector General that we have this urgent concern complaint, but the White House and the Justice Department is not letting us pass that on to you. And that's when Adam Schiff issues a news release and says he's issuing a subpoena for this complaint. It was Friday, September 13th, and I remember checking around in my sources, other sources in Congress. No one else seemed to know whether this was significant or not, and people were speculating that Schiff was out on a limb here. But in fact, we know he did know. He had a heads up. But that's a good thing because he was able to take the kind of action that made sure that the White House could not cover this up, which appears to be what they were trying to do.
Well, it's worth underlining, too, that Richard Burr, the chair of the Senate Intel Committee, a Republican, Richard Burr, not exactly a member of the squad, came out and said this is standard operating procedure, the way this went down. Sam Stein, I want to play a clip from this very show, September 17th. Sure. Chairman Schiff was on the show, and you asked him a question that has raised some eyebrows in the last 24 hours.
Hey, Congressman, a couple questions here on this whistleblower front. First off, have you heard from the whistleblower? Do you want to hear from the whistleblower? What protections could you provide to the whistleblower? And then you also said that the DNI is refusing to turn over this stuff, citing a request from a higher authority. The insinuation left, at least for me and others, was that the president himself had intervened. Is that the insinuation you sought to provide? And if so, what basis do you have for making that insinuation?
We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to, but I'm sure the whistleblower has concerns that he has not been advised, as the law requires, by the Inspector General or the Director of National Intelligence, just as to how he is to communicate with Congress. And so the risk for the whistleblower is retaliation. Will the whistleblower be protected under the statute if the offices that are supposed to come to his assistance and provide the mechanism are unwilling to do so? But yes, we would love to talk directly with the whistleblower.
Sam, you spoke to Chairman Schiff last night. I want to read the quote again. That was September 17th. Sure. Quote, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower." How does he explain that when clearly at that point the whistleblower had come to Chairman Schiff's committee?
So we talked for a couple minutes last night. He expressed regret for not having been more clear in his wording.
What did he mean?
He said at the time when he was saying that, obviously, we now know that the whistleblower had approached his staff, but there wasn't 100% certainty that the whistleblower who had approached his staff was the same one who was behind the actual complaint. There was a suspicion it was, but there wasn't 100% certainty. He also was explaining that he was trying to compel the whistleblower to come testify before the committee when he was saying that. But again, he expressed regret for what he said on the initial interview with Morning Joe, and said he should have been much more clear about it. I will say this puts him in some trouble. He clearly wasn't being forthright in that interview with us a couple weeks ago, and he should have been. That being said, if you're really bothered by what words Schiff said a couple weeks ago, and not the complaint or the fact that, for instance, Mike Pompeo claimed he wasn't on the call and it turned out he was, then you're being dishonest about this entire process. It's the substance of the complaint. That's the story. The process by which the complaint became public is a story, and you can consider that in its own right. But in terms of gravity of the situation, I don't think the process actually stands up all that well to the complaint itself.
A committee official, by the way, Mike, did concede, quote, "The chairman could have been more clear," as Sam said, but said he was referring to the committee officially interviewing the whistleblower and himself personally. Right. So, Mike, but again, the story that was spun yesterday by the White House and others was that Adam Schiff helped the whistleblower write the complaint.
Yeah.
That's patently false.
And it's no surprise that they would go there with that. But Ken Delaney, in the course of your reporting, Did you bump into any concern about what happened at the CIA and the CIA counsel's office with the whistleblower approaching the counsel, and the counsel's reaction was to take the complaint initially to the White House?
Yes, Mike, a lot of concern about how it was handled. Now, what experts in this whole process have said is that the general counsel of an agency has an obligation to sort of do that. They're not the inspector general. In fact, that's why people are advised to take complaints to the inspector general, who's independent, not the general counsel, who sort of has to inform everyone. Because, you know, this was a serious complaint about the conduct of the President of the United States. And it was only natural that she would go start circulating it around the government to investigate. It also went to the Justice Department. That said, there's a lot of concern about Courtney Elwood Simmons, this general counsel, a Trump appointee of the CIA, concern about, you know, where her loyalties lie, whose water she's carrying. Now, CIA officials insist she's a straight shooter, she's protecting the agency, but I have heard from sources concern that she is political and that, you know, that she's protecting Donald Trump's interests. So that will be a subject of inquiry, I think, as this process moves forward.
Ken,
Mike,
do we know whether she knew the whistleblower's identity?
that is not 100% clear, but because the whistleblower went to her through a colleague. But once it became clear certain identifying facts about this whistleblower, what his expertise was, where he had worked, there are not a large number of people that fit that description. And so it's fairly easy, I think, for White House officials at this point to determine at least a short list of suspects. Mike.
All right, Ken Delaney, and thank you very much. We'll be back to this story shortly.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.